Good evening to everyone. As my usual opening, Simon Jacobson is my name, and I welcome you all. This evening's topic is both driven by events going on in our lives and in the world today, as well as corresponding to this week's Torah portion. As I've repeated many times, especially in the last weeks, the expression from one of the great sages and mystics of the 18th century, Shemos Zalman, who said we should live with the times. And later his son helped explain that that means to live with a Torah that's read in those times. So without elaborating, as I've done in the past, the meaning of it, briefly, is that obviously all human beings occupy at all times certain time, space, as they say in physics today, time, space, and man. Or in the words of mystics, it would be olam, shana, nefesh, time, space, and soul. So every experience in life, at any given moment, in every given place, always has an interaction between time, space, and you. And it's a combination of those three that will determine what happens in your life. So in Jewish thought, we're not just victims and passing through space and time, we actually have the power to transform the space and time in which we live. Or the way we'd call it, sanctify time and space. And we do that through our actions. So in a sense, any given moment in life is neutral. The same thing is with the spaces we travel to, they're neutral. And you either have three options. You either use it for no purpose at all, or you do something destructive, or you do something constructive. And dependent on your choice will be how that moment in time and that corner of space will be impacted. So in a sense, every second that we're alive from the moment we were born, and as long as we'll be on this earth, we have a constant power to transform the time and space in which we live. If we're able to see ourselves as souls on a journey, the journey is through time and space. If you don't do that, and you just let time and space to control you, then you end up becoming a victim of circumstances. So just to give a simple example, there's an expression King David writes in the book of Psalms, Ma'ashem etzad degover kenonu. God leads the footsteps of a human being. What's the alternative? That you lead your own footsteps, or that it's a set of random circumstances that lead you from place to place. The difference is not just semantics, it's a dramatic, far-reaching consequences from these different perspectives. If one believes that there's a higher script that leads your path, that means that wherever you are in life, there's a deeper reason for you to be there. Then there are opportunities for you to uncover. And in that sense, both the excitement and the challenge of life and responsibility of life is to look at the spaces you arrive to and wonder why you're there. Sometimes we come to a place we don't like to be, but we had to end up being there for some reason, either inadvertently, or we had to be there because of certain responsibilities we have. So you could either sit and be bitter and complain, or at least internally feel like you don't want to be here, or you can look around and say, what opportunity, what greater thing can be achieved here? And if you're able to get beyond your own comfort and discomfort zone, which means really to get beyond your own ego and beyond your own self, you'll discover there's always higher purpose for every space that you find yourself in. And the same thing is with time. Every time is energy, and therefore every moment in time has its own opportunities. So this requires really a full-length discussion, but briefly, time and space are the two dimensions that define material existence. And we always find ourselves in some place, in some moment in time. And it should not be seen as just invisible forces around us. It's our choice. Do we elevate, refine the time and space in which we find ourselves, or do we not? So when you say living with the times, that expression that mystic stated, to live with the times, he's saying that whatever time you're in, let's say tonight is Wednesday night, there's a spiritual meaning behind this moment in time. So it's not just your day of your birthday or special holidays or other special days of the year, but every given moment of the year has its own special, unique energy. And when you're able to tap into it, you can actually elevate and transform time. Now, no one can, so to speak, beat the clock, and aging affects us all. Deadlines. Nevertheless, in the Torah there's a concept that's stated by Abraham, Vavram Zokan Baba Yomim, the Torah says. Abraham aged, and he came into his days. So the Zohar, the classic work of mysticism, Jewish mysticism, asks the question, it's a redundant statement, if he aged, obviously came into his days. What's the addition by saying Baba Yomim? So the Zohar says, Baba Yomim Shleimim. He came with complete days. You can age, and that's a physical process. Everybody ages. The question is, did you conquer time or did time conquer you? And Abraham was a person who every moment of his life, he used it to the fullest potential. So then, time actually empowered him. So yes, we can see time as our enemy, whereas, you can't get enough done in this amount of time. You can see time as a challenge in that sense, our enemy. And time will always, as I said, the clock turns and rolls on whether you like it or not. But think for a moment, if you saw every moment in time as a life, like a child, every moment in time as a unique opportunity, then it's exciting to know, and it's dynamic to know, that this moment in time has something for you to tap into. And this is truly what mysticism and Kabbalah and Hasidic thought teaches us. That even when you don't have a party going on, and you don't have anything that is so-called getting you high, or stimulating you, usually we look for stimulation outside of ourselves. The mere fact that you exist is a stimulating force, because what it does is recognizes that the time and space you're in, even if there's no one else around and there's nothing happening, that itself is a happening. And it's up to you to bring it alive. That's why you'll find people who are truly happy human beings from within. It's not through any type of commodity that they bought or any type of particular action that they take. It's an attitude where they see life as constant opportunity. And whoever they meet, whether it's someone that's pleasant or not so pleasant, whatever space they're in and whatever time they're in, they're always looking for the so-called enchantment, the mystery, the power of that particular moment or space. You see it in children. Children are never bored. Look at your newborn children, young children, as they begin to explore the world. They don't need entertainment as we do, like we have to go to a party or watch a show or go somewhere. Children, just by being, by existing, they are enchanted by the mere essence of existence. They crawl around, feel the world around them, try to experience it, try to understand what it's like. So the question is, what happened to us? At what point do we lose that type of sense of enchantment and magic, where we need something to happen, someone to do something, or you to do something to excite you? In other words, what dies inside of us that doesn't have the ability to generate its own internal sense of excitement? So truly, when you talk about mysticism, and especially the Hasidic dimension of it, you always connect it to joy. And joy is a force of constant energy. Joy is not necessarily as a result, I go to a party and therefore I'm joyous. It's the other way around. Because you're joyous, that's why you create parties. So who's the one that is initiating the joy? From a Torah point of view, joy should come from within. And that's why you have a mitzvah to be joyful and joyous. You could ask the question, well, I'm not in the mood. How could you command someone to be joyous? You can command someone to do an action, to give charity even if you're not in the mood of it, or to put on tefillin, or to keep Shabbos even if it's not something you're feeling. But to be joyful, or to be joyous, is a matter of feeling. And the answer is because we do have control. Joy is a natural state of the soul, a soul that is in touch with itself and the purpose of its existence is always joyful. What creates lack of joy is a soul that's out of touch, or put it this way, which is held captive by the material body and the world in which it exists. And then time and space do become a burden instead of a springboard. So, as a short introduction, this is why we look into the Torah of each week's Parsha to discover how to uncover the energy of that particular time. So this particular chapter in Torah that we're reading this week has its own energy. It's obviously a very powerful one, and maybe one of the most unique in the sense that it captures the beginning of a new epoch, a new era in life. And it's important to point out as well, Torah is often seen as a story of the past. Story of the past. When you read the episodes, the characters, the place of geography, and you read about things that happened thousands of years ago. Over 3,000 years ago. Moses lived 3,300 and some years ago. And the same with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, the Exodus and exile and Exodus from Egypt. But nevertheless, the same thing you find consistently in Torah, at least several times where there's the emphasis of the word Hayom. The expression in the Torah, there's a word that says Hayom, today. So the question is asked, when you read the Torah, it says today, when is today? When Moses said it, when it happened? When Jews read it 1,000 years ago, or today? In 2009? And the answer is that the Torah is nitzchi, which means eternal, and whenever you read it, it's as if it is today. And as Rashi cites from the Medrash, Sifri, and other places, it says, B'chol yom yir beinecha chadashim, which means that you should not look at the Torah and its stories as an old story, but every day should be looked at as a renewed, as if it just happened right now. So imagine in life you were able to hold on to those magical moments as if they were happening just now. One of the sad things to see is when we have special moments in life, and everybody has their magic moment. I'm sure there's no one in this room that does not have a moment that you can identify that was so unique, but what's sad about it is the moment passes. And when the moment passes, you go back to our inertia and back to the monotony of our regular routines. And yes, it becomes a distant memory. But imagine you were able to access inside your soul the power, the joy, the sheer passion and magic, as if it existed the moment that it took place. That requires digging deeper beneath the surface of the material existence, which is so deceptively repetitive, and get to a place which is bubbling with life. Now today, in a strange way, God reveals things in His own way. Today, one of the big advancements of science and technology that we have today, to cut it to in one short sentence, is that we recognize that the universe, what you see is not what you get. Whereas once upon a time you could have imagined that you could not have imagined what is going on beneath the surface level of material existence, today we know that even if everyone were to leave this room right now, and I'm not asking you to do that, but if everybody, this room would not be an empty room. Not just because there's furniture and walls and ceiling and beams and other objects, because every particle of matter is teeming with pulsating energy, what we call subatomic particles, that are constantly alive. There is no such thing as truly a dead thing. So when we say something is dead, what do we mean by it's dead? The answer is it's our perception that it's dead. It's dead in our eyes, or it's dead like a person says, I feel dead today, or I feel down, or I feel numb. It's a numbness on the outer level that so-called seduces us and holds us captive, but beneath the surface, it's teeming with energy. Interesting word in Judaism, in Hebrew, in the Torah, for the word nature. Does anybody know what the word in Hebrew for the word nature is?
Teva?
Right, teva. Teva. Tez vez ayin, teva. The word teva, what is the root of the word teva? Okay, I understand it means nature. But as you know, in Hebrew, every word has more power than just the initial meaning. Teva means submerged. comes from the expression tovu v'yamsuf, that they submerge something inside the water. For instance, when you throw an object inside of a sea, inside a body of water, the object disappears and all is left is the face of the water. To the point that you can deceive yourself into thinking there's nothing more but the water. Now, had we not ever gone scuba diving or find cameras that discovered the world beneath the sea, you would think, except for a few fish that here and there pop out or wash up on the shore, the sea is pretty much a dead place. Today we know that the sea is not only is it not dead, it's more alive than Earth. There are more species, more mystery, more depths. As a matter of fact, as it says in the Talmud, Kol ma sheyesh b'yabash sheyesh b'yam, everything that's on land is in the sea. It doesn't say the other way around, which means that the sea has more than what's on land. So we give them names because we are, human beings give names based on their standards. So we have sea cucumbers and sea octopus and sea elephants and sea lions and sea so on and so forth. But the fact is there are many more species and many more that have never been discovered. When you look at the ocean, you would not know that. If someone say, prove it to me, you'd have to go down underneath and see. So teva is a word which means deception, really. That within nature is submerged unbelievable power. We dismiss it and call it nature. It's nature. But let me tell you, the Baal Shem Tov says the difference between a natural event and a miracle is what? So most people think a miracle means the suspension of the laws of nature, and nature is not the suspension of the laws. Things are working. Like the sun rises every morning, that's nature. If the sun were to be stopped in the middle of the sky one day, like it says in the Torah about Joshua, that the Eretz be given them, we'd say, wow, that's a miracle, suspension of nature. So the Baal Shem Tov says no. The difference between a miracle and nature is one word. It's called frequency. How often it happens. If the sun were to rise once in our lifetimes, everyone would call it a miracle. And they'd have camera crews and families all coming out to take pictures of the beautiful ball in the sky rising in the horizon. But since it happens every morning, we are human beings that feed off novelty. We don't see something special because it's repetitive. Basically, the way the Chacham Tzvi puts it is that miracle. A nature is just consistent miracles, just repeating itself, perpetual miracles. I remember a fellow came to this class. He was a doctor, an obstetrician, and at the end of the class, we were just hanging around and people were talking about different things. Someone asked him why he chose his line of work. And he said something in his mind, he must have just said it nonchalantly, but it left a lasting impact on me. And he said, he says, I work in New York Hospital in New York City here, which we know is situated right over the FDR. And he says, sometimes I deliver a baby and it's the middle of the night, it's quiet. And sometimes it's the middle of the rush hour. And I often think to myself, here, look at the contrast. People are rushing in their cars, you hear the horns honking, the brakes screeching, you could sense the tempers flaring. People are rushing. Where are they rushing to? What's the important things they're rushing to? So some are rushing home to dinner, for a meeting, for a show. Some are rushing. Most are rushing just to rush. And then when they get there, they don't necessarily have what to do, but so they rush further to get to the next place. And he says, and here, by contrast, I'm about to deliver a child, a new life. The mother, of course, is there, an attending nurse. There's no bumper-to-bumper traffic. Nobody's rushing to see this miracle. The fact that I could be part of such a miracle, the miracle of beginnings, the miracle of each of our births, and the contrast of a world that's busy with so many different things, as important as they are, always brings me to tears. It puts my life in perspective. And that's why I chose the line of work that I do. So that night, after the class, which those days was in the Upper West Side, I decided to drive down the FDR just to experience for myself his sentiment. And I realized, yes, We all are in our rush hours. Some of them are physical rush hours, some are metaphorical rush hours. And the rush hours they distract us, not allow us to appreciate the real miracles going on in our lives. And I can tell you consistently something that I've always learned. When people come to you and they come to me for counseling or they want help, especially if they're desperate or something really troublesome in their lives, what my real goal is to show them that there are miracles happening right here, that they don't need some magic pill or some trick coming from anywhere else. It's within them. And all they need to do is get rid of the rush hour. Because remember, when you have loud noises, extracurricular noises, they drown out the subtleties that are there all the time. So it's not about discovering something new, it's recognizing it was always there. And you have it inside of you. Not only is your heart beating all the time, which itself is a symbol of constant movement, and not only are you breathing all the time, thank God, but you have a soul that is alive and vibrating. Unfortunately, it's trapped inside your body and trapped inside a physical world, waiting to be released. What most of us are doing, we are not only not releasing it, we're adding layers and more layers to keep it more trapped. And you think, how could anybody want to be so self-destructive? But that's how it works. We become victims of our own habits, trapped in our own routines, and it's what happens when you get so overwhelmed with the moment, or this instant gratification, or the relief, any type of temporary relief from the tension, existential loneliness of life, that your soul feels more and more alienated as we grow older. And that's what happens to us from childhood to adulthood. At some point, a child does not have any of that. A child's soul is completely alive. Until adults shut it down, or frighten it, or do other things even worse. Abuse, abandonment, lack of nurturing. So the flower ceases to grow and begins to wither. And we're left to pick up the pieces. So I'm not trying to depict here a depressing picture, because the goal here, obviously, my goal here is to actually teach us all that we can find that vibrant soul. And you do that, as I said, you live with the times. You look into the soul of every experience. Every experience in life has a soul in it, even painful experiences. That doesn't make it less painful, but it makes it more meaningful. It's not senseless. And when you understand the meaning of something, you're able to redeem even difficult situations. So with that introduction being said, let's go to this week's chapter. As I said, a very extremely powerful chapter, because it is the birth of Moses. It is also the beginning, of course, of the exile. Beginning of a new era, as I discussed last week, a transition. By Yaakov Melech Chadash, the Torah begins after the first few verses. A new king, a new leader rose in Egypt. Some say he was actually new. Some say he was he conveniently forgot the past, and he turns on the Jews. The 70 souls that came down with Jacob have now multiplied manyfold, and Pharaoh feels threatened by them, and he determines that he's going to create a conspiracy of enslaving them. And the story begins how the Egyptians conspired, plotted, and slowly manipulated a situation where the Jews, who were foreigners in their land, became their slaves. It wasn't just slavery, it was genocide as well. But there's always the silver lining, there's always, as they say, magdim refuah lamaka. The Torah always talks about that before the illness, we always have the healing. God precedes every illness with the healing. There's no illness, in other words, in this world that doesn't have some way to heal it. So we have the birth of Moses. And the birth is described in detail, that Moses is born, and his parents saw he was good. As Rashi explains, the house filled up with light. There was an aura about this young child. But his beginnings are not so simple, because, as you may know, Pharaoh had decreed that all male boys should be killed, thrown into the river Nile, because his stargazers told him that he one day will have to contend with a man that will rise and lead the Jews against Egypt out of exile, out of the slavery. So he's, in his perceived brilliance, says, you know what, we'll kill all the boys, that way this man will never rise. But, obviously, he killed quite a few, but Moses did make it through. His mother ingeniously hides him in a basket on the river, Nile, which itself has many messages, and I've discussed them previous years, because the river Nile, remember, was also the god, the idol of Egypt, where there's no rain, so the fields were irrigated by the river. They worshipped the river Nile, which was the reason that the first of the 10 plagues was turning their god into blood. But this same river Nile that was the idol of Egypt became the savior of Moses. And Moses forever would be linked with water. He was he was saved by water. Later he would not strike the water. Aaron had to do so. Later he parted the waters. And Moshe, the name Moses itself, means water, being drawn from water. Minamayim mishasiyu. All these details are all very relevant, and as I said, I'll allude to them, but that's not the central theme. What I want to discuss was what I think is most relevant, especially as we are about to inaugurate a new 44th President of the United States. Leaders. Here you have a study in leadership, Moses. Virtually considered to be probably the greatest leader that ever lived. You could see it from the results. Set in motion forces that are affecting the world till this day. The Bible is the biggest bestseller. Its principles drive most of civilization. It's the mother and father of the major religions. And it all begins with this Moses. So there's one episode here where Moses grows up, of course, in Pharaoh's home. But then he goes out and he sees the suffering of his own people. He knew that they were his people. He was not subject to their suffering, but he witnessed it. So the Torah tells the story like this. It happened in those days. And Moses grew up and went out to his brethren, to his brothers and sisters, and witnessed their burdens, their suffering. And what he saw specifically, he saw Ishmitzri, an Egyptian individual, striking a Jew. So the Torah continues and says the following: Vayifan koi v'koi. He turned here and there, which means he looked around from right to left. Vayar ki einish. He saw there was no one else, there was no one around, no einish, no person. And he went and defended the Jew from this Egyptian. He killed this Egyptian and buried him in the sand. The fact is, he was witnessed by a few people, actually some Jews, who informed on him. As a result, Moses had to escape, and then from there he goes to Midian, where he'll meet his future wife. But this verse here is an interesting verse that I want to focus on, because you'll see in it the answer to a lot of our questions and problems and challenges. You know, we talk about our times, and you have to ask yourself the question, do we have any leaders? The better question has to be asked before we say do we have leaders, we have to define what is a leader. You know, when in the Democratic primaries, when Obama and Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama were both vying for being the Democratic nominee, so there was this debate that went on between them. What is the role of a president of the United States? Is he a visionary, or is he a CEO? Which means his strengths are in administrative management, delegation, and leading a large company called the United States of America. Or is it a visionary, more of a vision person, who's not so involved necessarily in management skills, but can provide vision to the country? And it was interesting to me because it intrigued me because I went to look at the one who was arguing that's a vision. I wanted to see, okay, what's the vision that he's offering? Until this day, I don't know what it was. So the debate was a nice debate, but it would have been nicer if you actually had two models. Here's someone here providing vision, this one's providing management. The fact of the matter is, I think, and you could see it somewhat from the world in which we live, You know, when a ship is riding in the sea and there's no storms, you can't really know whether there's a good captain, there's no captain for that matter. Well, there's an automatic pilot, and rides. A ship that has been built well will float and knows how it moves. When do you see or don't see that there's a leader, a captain at the ship, at the helm? When there's a storm, when there's a crisis, when there's a problem. And that's what you see. Are there leaders, are there no leaders? We've gotten used to, I believe, to lowering the standard of leadership to the point where for many a leader means someone who's able to put out firefighters. Wherever there's a fire, you put out a fire. It's a good leader. Knows how to put out a fire. But the true leadership is someone who doesn't just put out fires, but someone who prevents fires from starting in the first place. So we live in a world where there's much turbulence today. A lot of upheaval, economic, but not just economic, it's also about life and death, especially in the Middle East. And we see now actually playing itself out in Gaza, but nothing new. Before it was in Lebanon and Iraq, Iran. You're dealing with a hotbed that's not gone away already for the last few decades. And it just takes time and just pops up here and again. If there was a leader, they would have tried to address what is the root of this problem. I understand that when you're dealing with a crisis, you do whatever you can short term to stem the bleeding. Let's take a medical example. Someone is hurt. So obviously the first thing you must do is stop the bleeding and just create some stability. But then, a good doctor is going to get to the root of the problem, or else you're just going to have to face it again. So the first and most important thing of all, if one wants to know a leader, do we have anyone that gets to the root of problems? So clearly with the Middle East, nobody's gotten to any root because no one has solved anything. It's just the same old story. Read newspapers in 1960s, 1970s, 1980s. It's just different names, but it's more or less the same problems. Of course, human beings always like hope, so we always have renewed hopes. So the Middle East is definitely an area that exposes a lack of leadership. And I have to add, sadly, that the leadership is lacking is not just in the Arab world, Muslim world, or in the world of the West, Europe and the United States. Even in our own good old Israel is lacking serious leadership. The first sign of a leader is someone who can provide a vision that's clear, defined, that everyone can understand. When it comes, for instance, to business, there's a thing called a mission statement. And the leader of the company, let's take Bill Gates of Microsoft, is radically focused on that mission. Microsoft's mission is a computer in every home and in every office. That's their mission statement. Which in turn compels them to have to create software to make sure that it's an indispensable tool in home and office. So they figured out every stupid little thing you need at home and office, and they created software for that. You could strike the word stupid. I didn't mean it that way. But you know what I'm trying to say. Google's mission is, I've been studying some mission statements lately. So Google's mission is to organize all the information of the world and make it accessible to everyone. It's not exact words, but the content. These are focused, sharp mission statements that create a focus that thousands and tens of thousands of employees can follow. Now you can imagine how difficult it is to keep thousands of people aligned towards one line mission. But if it's a sharp mission, and the bottom line someone's watching over, which is money, that's what keeps it focused. Even though this may sound tragic, but the fact is the most efficient of all machines in history is the war machine. When you have an identifiable enemy, you have a very clear mission. Take World War II. There were the Nazis, the Allies, and the Axis. You know where they are, you know where the enemy lines are drawn, you know what they want, and you know that your goal is to conquer that. It's as simple as it gets. It's bloody and painful, but it's focused. Now in times of freedom and prosperity, what's our mission? What's our individual mission? What's our collective mission? If a company can't function without one, and you can never fight a battle without one, how can we? So as I said, when things are going well, okay, you know, economy is humming along smooth, soundly, or so we thought, and seemingly peaceful times, great. But then there's a September 11th, and there's a Middle East altogether, and then there's an economic meltdown. Suddenly, it's not that simple. And then it exposes the great vacuum. Where is the leader? So the leaders weren't here before either, but then we thought we can get away without it. So let's say you're a soldier in an army, and your commander-in-chief suddenly disappears, or he doesn't even know really what he wants to do. Imagine he's constantly second-guessing himself. Soldiers are there to implement some type of battle. I'm not advocating war here, I'm just trying to suggest a type of an analogy, a focus. So if you talk about leaders, I can give you a good list of criteria. You tell me where is there a leader today. I don't see any. This doesn't mean we don't have good administrators. And this doesn't mean that we don't have some people who are brilliant in leading companies. And hopefully the new president will be able to lead us through some of this mess. And maybe he will surprise everybody and be a true visionary leader. But it's very rare. And especially when you look into the Torah and you see a man like Moses, it becomes very glaringly clear what we're lacking. So here you have this story. And on a personal note, my father, who's a journalist, was once by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who they were very close, and he went to see him in a private audience. They were speaking, and in the middle, the Rebbe asked my father what people. My father was a journalist, so he asked him what people are saying out there. I think it was the time of right after the Yom Kippur War, around that time in the early 70s. So he said to the Rebbe, he said, well, people wonder, actually my father was wondering, but that's how he said, people wonder, like, what gives the Rebbe the fortitude and that type of strength to be able to fight a war with words, on certain positions and moral clarity, without necessarily having the support of anyone else. So the Rebbe, it was the week of this Parsha, and the Rebbe said to him, it says in this verse here, that Moses looked always, Vayifan Koivakai, Vayarke Einish, and so there was no one. Why did he look around? So the simple interpretation, the Rebbe said, is because he wanted to make sure that nobody was watching when him go defend the Jew and attack the Egyptian. No, it would have been dangerous. The end of but so the Rebbe said, is that what Moses was involved in? He was scared for his own skin? Protecting himself? The person is being killed. He should have immediately defended. So he put himself in danger. The fact is, it didn't help anyway. He looked around, and he was watched, even though he didn't see anybody. But there was Dasan of Aviram, they were watching, and they later informed on him. And why does the Torah document? Why is it so important to know this seemingly trivial detail that Moses looked around? To just say Moses saw a Jew being attacked, and he defended the Jew. Simple. And the Rebbe responded that my interpretation of it is very simple. Moses looked around, by Yifan Koivakai, he looked everywhere. Is there anyone that cares? Is there anyone that has empathy for a person being hurt? An innocent soul being beaten by a captor who took him into slavery. And he saw Vayarke, there's no one around. So he realized if there's no one else, he has to do something. That's a leader. That was the Rebbe's answer to my father, saying why sometimes you have to take a stand, even though no one else is. Precisely because no one else is. So here's the big challenge to every one of us. As I often point out, there's nobody that likes to be called a conformist, right? There are no conformists in this room, correct? See? If there are conformists, please raise your hand. I never get anyone raising. Yeah, sometimes cute people will be cute, they'll raise their hand, but are you a conformist back there? Is that what you said? I'll take questions a little later, okay? You can write it down and I'll take it a little later. They used to tell us in school. I'm on a roll.
I just think we have a lot of leaders in the society.
So listen, when you'll give a class, you'll pontificate about it. So I look. So when you want to be challenged in a situation where there's an injustice being done, so they have statistics that many people will walk by or ignore a mugging on a street because they don't want to get involved, they don't want to get themselves into trouble, and so on and so forth. They have statistics that when authorities tell people something, they'll do it blindly, even if it goes against their natural conscience. Studies made about the 100 million Germans that were silent. Many were silent, not necessarily directly killed a Jew in the Holocaust, but they were silent. So the question is the ability to stand up when there's no one else standing up. How many of us would really do that? And how many of us do it right now? So yes, there's injustices that are very blatant. You see something wrong, so you challenge it. But let's talk about things that are happening that are not so blatant. For instance, during the summer, even though it wasn't my plan, I wrote an article about a school friend of mine who I hadn't seen for many years, maybe 30 years. And then I bumped into him in Manhattan. And I remember when we were back in school, in high school, he had already began to so-called slide. He was an excellent student, brilliant guy, sensitive, unbelievable potential. But he got himself involved in trouble, gambling and then drugs and so on. And I saw him waste away. And here I saw him 30 years later, and he was impossible to even look at. He could not even make eye contact with me. So I wrote about it during the summer, and it evoked a very strong reaction from many people, which in turn opened up a whole can of worms about the issue of child abuse, which has been in the news lately with Dov Hikind and so on and so forth. And I saw the responses back and forth, and I wrote about it for several weeks. So I, receiving many emails and comments and feedback, came to understand something I've always known. But you know, when there are injustices happening in a home, if you were sitting in a restaurant, which once happened to me, and I still don't know what to deal with a moral dilemma like this. You're sitting at a restaurant, let's say, and you're eating a meal, and you see another table of family there together, and you see the father do something overtly abusive to his child. This is he's doing in public. You can imagine what's happening perhaps in private, at home. Do you have an obligation to say something or do something?
Yes.
Because on one hand you can say, if you get up and say something, it won't help anyone. You're going to tell the father, the mother or something, what are you going to do? They may end up punishing the child even more because they'll blame the child for that. So obviously it has a lot to do with whether you can accomplish something or not. And the Torah has guidelines for situations like this. But you see, there are many, many injustices happening that are not so overt. Yes, there are popular causes that people go and protest and take to the streets, especially if there's a whole group, and Facebook, I don't know, every 3 seconds another group opens up. I'm sure all for great causes. That's one thing. But when you're talking about those little private things that go on, the pain that people suffer in silence, which in a way is like the incident here in this Torah here. You weren't talking about a killing of millions of people, thousands of people. It was one individual. Not to minimize an individual. And Moses saw it. Could have said, tens of thousands of Jews were enslaved. So you're going to save one Jew? He's going to attack one Egyptian? What's he going to accomplish with it? So if he went and, as he would later go, to Pharaoh and deal with the whole issue, it's one thing. Yet the Torah finds it important to document this one small episode, which there's no doubt many unsung heroes that exist that would do similar things. But the leaders that are elected, and the leaders, I would say, even in the religious communities, have become, unfortunately, mostly administrators. You have here and there, and since I'm not mentioning names, there's no Lashon Hara involved. But to me, the sign of leadership is someone that inspires others to be leaders as well. and where real change would be affected. So if you take Moses as a so-called role model, you could identify a few features. And then we're going to talk about leaders themselves and what our responsibility or role is in all of this. So you have, obviously, the first feature right here, you have empathy. The ability to empathize with another's pain, even at risk to yourself. Clear. Number 2, even if no one else is there, he looked around, he sees no one else. The strength and courage to act, even if there's no team, there's no one behind you. 3, which is not in this week's chapter, but as the story evolves about Moses, what Moses provided was a vision. There's a vision, and a very clear vision. In one sentence, Moses' vision, which he embraced and ultimately conveyed to the Jewish people and to the whole world, for that matter, was that we are here on earth for a purpose, and the purpose is not to give in to our selfish interests, but to transform the world and turn it into a sanctuary, into a holy place. This is Moses' essential message. It's God's essential message, but Moses is the one that embraced it, that conveyed it, and that communicated it. So you have this empathy, courage, and vision. And at the same time, if you look it through the story, when Moses comes back, after God says to him, in this week's chapter, that I'm choosing you to be the leader, so firstly, he avoided it by all means. He was not interested in assuming leadership. He was not interested. He kept saying, let Aaron be the leader, let someone else, I'm not worthy, this one, that one, I can't speak. Which is another fourth virtue, which is humility. And God tells Moses, it's not someone that wants the job, I want someone that doesn't want the job. So let's look for leaders like that. And then, afterwards, you find, as I said, that when Moses finally leads the people, they reject him as well. First of all, the bureaucrats and the establishment, the Ziknei Yisrael said, this is not man for us. They saw him as a stranger, he grew up in Pharaoh's home. They saw him as they did not trust him. Throughout the Torah you find that he was never really one of the people. He was always like different. You see, for instance, his own brother, Aaron, and Miriam turn on him. And throughout the Torah you find this type of instigation. So he was a very lonely man in many ways. But he stood for his positions and did show vision and did lead them all the way till the promised land, led them to the destination. So when you study Moses, you have a true model. But above all, the real question here is not necessarily whether we're going to find a leader like that. What does it tell all of us? And I want to suggest something which may sound a little radical, but it seems to me makes sense. And that is, as they say, an expression, "B'mokim she'ein ish, izeicha herring afish." You ever hear that expression? It means when there is, how do you explain that one? It's a rhyme in Hebrew. It says when you don't have a ish, a true powerhouse, a true leader, so even a herring becomes a fish. Now, you know that true fish connoisseurs don't see herring as fish. Herring is for these kiddushim. Jews make a kiddush, so they give herring. Herring is not seen. I don't know why herring has such a bad name, but it doesn't compare to some of the more elegant fish in the sea. Okay? But I'll tell you a story about herring, by the way, since we're on the topic. It's not connected to this discussion, but you know, Jews, they say, are pretty smart people, right? So the question is where this wisdom comes from. In the olden days in Russia, there was a thing called a poritz. You know, the poritz was like a noble, well, I would call him noble person, but like a landowner, who's usually not necessarily the right landowner, but he was a landowner. The poritz, unfortunately, the people were subject to his whims because he would own a lot of land, and he would rent out or lease out pieces of this land here for a kretschme, for an inn, for a home, for a little farm. And that's how Jews eked out their living in the good old days in Russia and in Eastern Europe, they were subject, but these parts could, as I said, they were very moody, and you were dependent on their mishigas. So the story goes that one Paritz had this Jew who was one of his subjects, who would rent out a little inn, pay him every month, and then he would use it, he would have guests, he would serve them, and he'd try to make a little living based on that. One day he's having a conversation with the Paritz, and the Paritz says to him, tell me, what makes you Jews so smart? You guys are always so shrewd and smart. So the Jew saw an opportunity, so he said to him, I'll tell you, but it's a secret, and you can't share this with anyone. So he says, okay, please. You know, it intrigued him. So the Jew says to him, it's the herring that we eat. The Paritz says, the herring? What's he talking about? He says, yeah, we eat herring. So the Paritz says, of course, very wisely, and if I eat this herring, would I also get smarter? So the Jew says, yeah, but it's a very special herring, it's very expensive, and it's hard to get, very rare, but if you eat it, yeah, I'm sure you'll get smarter. So the Paritz sees an opportunity here, he's an opportunity to get us smarter. So he says to him, okay, how much is it? He says, well, for one piece of herring, it's 1,000 ruble. It's a lot of money, $1,000. So go ahead, okay. The Paritz had all the money in the world, no problem. He brings him a piece of herring, he eats it, doesn't feel any change. So the Jew says to him, listen, you know how many years, thousands of years of herring we've been eating? It's not just one piece of herring, it doesn't change anything. Okay, so every Friday, the Jew would come with a patch of herring. They found this rare species somewhere. And the Paritz would dish out the rubles. And the weeks rolled on. And slowly the Jew was getting the rubles. The Paritz was freshing herring, going out of style. And after a few months, the Paritz calls the Jew and says, something's wrong. I don't feel any change. I'm eating all this herring every week. I'm stuffing myself with herring. And I don't feel anything. I feel the same brains that I always had. Not even any shift. Anyway, the Jew bought a little more time, said to him, you got to give it a little more month. Another month. Finally, the Paritz says, enough is enough. I think this whole thing is a scam, and you've been fooling me, because I don't feel any change, and I don't know with this herring thing, it doesn't even make sense. So the Jew says to him, you see, you're getting smarter already. So that's the herring story. It's not related to the whole parsha or anything, but I felt since I so-called maligned herring, I should also say something in its defense. They save the whales and they save the herring, right? We have different causes we have to represent. Don't take me seriously. I'm not trying to initiate a new movement here. That's what you mean. So.
We'll just change it.
Okay, tape break. I'll take a question while we're tape breaking already. Another person with a question. Good night. Just looking for a leader.
Did you say anything to the family member at the restaurant?
No, I didn't. And I didn't. Not because I was uncomfortable. It wasn't like I felt there wouldn't be any benefit. But I never forgot the dilemma. If I knew them or I knew somebody that knew them, it's one thing. The question is, should I have gone pursued it to the point to report it to the authorities? It's a good question. I mean, I'm not saying I did the right thing. I'm just sharing the question. In a situation, I think ultimately from a Torah point of view, these things are very much relevant. What can you accomplish? That doesn't mean you shouldn't protest even if you can accomplish. But here, you're talking about a family dynamic. Why is he going to listen to me? I felt terrible. What could you say? And this is not uncommon. What happens if you're living on a block and you suspect that at home there's some abuse going on, but there's no proof? What should one intervene? It's a very good question. And I'm not even saying that's the story with Moses. Moses saw crime happening and so on. And the family dynamic is far more complicated than when it is with a stranger, obviously. You wanted to say something?
To possibly call the police or a hotline and say, I think something's going on.
Yeah, but you have to know whether just this may be an isolated incident, and then you start accusing. It can get very troublesome. I know a story with the opposite. Someone suspected, they informed, and they took the children away from the parents, and they discovered there was nothing happened. There's a big, this is I'm just pointing out life is not simple. That's all I'm saying. this still forces us all to ask the question whether it's our comfort or discomfort that is making it. It shouldn't be based on that. What I'm discussing here is more like objectively. I think case by case is ultimately the way to go. You have to look at a situation and maybe get an objective opinion and then decide what to do. Usually it's good to talk to a professional because they can recognize things and stuff like that. And even then, not that simple. Families, unfortunately, parents can destroy their children, and then it's very hard to protect children from parents.
I remember the article was very strong signal. Be aware of this.
Yeah, that's the thing. Also it's another thing that's also pushed under the carpet, which is also a travesty. Which to just simply minimize these things because they're uncomfortable or because it looks bad. I always think to myself when people say we can't tell anyone about you that you were abused because it's going to shock your shidduch, which means it's going to disturb your ability to get married because our family's going to have a bad name. I always say to myself, one second, it should be the other way around. Why is the victim worried about the shidduch? Why is the criminal not worried about a shidduch? Instead, so it's like everything is turned upside down, but the people who are being hurt can't say anything because it may hurt us further. And the people who are the perpetrators, they have no problem with shidduch. It's a big topic. I don't want to really go there because it's a thorny topic. And honestly, just to protest it is one thing. I think it requires a lot of leadership, frankly, and also sensitivity to case by case. There's no rule of the game. Every story is a different one. It's too subtle and too many nuances to be able to just make a broad stroke. This is what you do. This is what you don't do. I think if there are enough people who are wise and sensitive talking about it, that already is progress because it's at least coming to the table and not being ignored. So that I absolutely support. At the time, just for the record, this is somewhat of a tangent. There's a group of a bunch of men and women who were abused as children, and they got together like a group, 80 or 90 of them, and they're like, they're all gung ho. They're not gonna, they took up arms to expose every abuse around. They asked me to be part of it. I told them that I'd be happy to advise and consult. I don't want to be part of a witch hunt either. And it could end up becoming a crusade, which goes the other extreme. Everything has to be done with balance, etc. Anyway, but to go back to the story here with Moses, I find here's a fundamental dilemma that seems to be very clear. The Torah tells us, no question, that there were leaders once in history. Moses was a leader. Joshua was a leader. We had leaders, King David, King Solomon. We had leaders in the times of the Talmud. There was a Nasi, was called the president, like a leader. There was an Av Bezdin, the head of the court. There was a Melech, a king. You had the heads of the tribes. Each tribe had a leader. The concept of Nasius, of leadership, is we have throughout the Torah and throughout history. Nisim. As a matter of fact, for example, on Hanukkah, we read about the offerings of each of the Nisim, each of the leaders. We read it also in the beginning of the month of Nisan. So the concept exists. And I've talked about it many times here. I have a chapter in Torah Meaning for Life about leadership, which I'll address in a few minutes, if we have time, one aspect of that. The question then is, what happened in history? Why, I'm specifically talking now for the Jewish people, but it really is a broader question in history. What happened to are there leaders today? Yes, there are people who call themselves rabbis. There are people so-called Reish HaKehilas, head of communities. And there's a president of Israel, and there's a prime minister of Israel. And there are community councils, and different communities have their particular leaders that represent their interests. But the Talmud says an interesting thing. It says, Im Rishenim K'malachim. If the early generations were like angels, we're like human beings. If the early generations were like human beings, we're like animals. Basically suggesting that as the generations flow, the later the generation, the weaker is its power. It also says in some books that every generation gets what it's worth. You get the leader you deserve. So just like there weren't such big tzaddikim, just like today they're not such great leaders, they're also not such great what's the word for it? Great, the antithesis to leaders. Great wicked people. So in other words, things have become a lot more mediocre. Now this issue is a very relevant one because, as you know, I'm sure everyone here in your life, you look for someone to talk to, a mentor. Who can you trust? I've heard too many stories where people said, I thought I could trust somebody, and they turned out not to be trustworthy. Turned out to be someone that actually did things that were not appropriate. I don't know whether you're in that category, that you were disappointed in someone, or you're in a category that you never found someone in the first place. But it's a big issue, because you have in the Torah the concept of Aseh lecha rav, v'knei lecha chaver, that you should appoint for yourself a teacher, a mentor, and acquire a friend. Just by show of hands, if you don't mind, that's up to you. How many of you feel you have a true mentor? Okay. The minority, right, in this room.
And asking how many have a true friend.
Okay, let's go to that one.
That's a different one.
How many have a true friend? Okay, friends, there are more. Good. And a friend doesn't mean necessarily a Facebook friend. That's good, right? Now, a mentor is a great gift because to have someone that you can trust, that you can share with, and can give you an objective perspective, and could also kick you in your pants from time to time if you need it, is a great gift. Lives would be changed completely if when we were teenagers we found the right mentor. But that usually doesn't happen on its own. You know, for some people, they are blessed and it happens. But what would you tell somebody who comes to you, as many have come to me, and say, you know, I'm looking for someone that I can trust to talk to? Who would you suggest? And you yourself have been disappointed. If here, three quarters, 90% of the room did not raise their hand to have a mentor. So if someone came to you, obviously, you're not going to send them to anyone because you don't have one. Who are you going to send them to? So what if it's your own child? A young person wants to get some direction. And I'm not just talking about a mentor, a job mentor, or a career mentor, a professional mentor. I'm talking about someone you can bare your soul to, who has sensitivity to the soul. So, talk about rabbis and leaders. Let me share with you something I once discussed at length. I think I wrote about it as well. In response to people asking me a question, how do you find a true leader? How do you find a true rabbi? So here too you have to define what a rabbi means. For many people, a rabbi is someone that has that is a pulpit rabbi, has a pulpit in a synagogue, is a scholar, knows Torah, can even maybe render a legal halachic decision, and that's what many would call a rabbi. So let me tell you this true answer for this. This is a story that goes back to Tanakh. Okay, you have the story that the Jewish people come to the prophet Samuel, and they say, we want you to appoint for us a king. This was before the Jews had King Saul, who would become the first king. We want you to appoint for us a king. Samuel gets very upset at the people and says to them, you have God as king. What do you need a human king? But they insist. So Samuel the prophet turns to God and says, what should I do? So God said, if they want a king, give them a king. And he appointed King Saul, Shaul HaMelech, the first king in Israel. Later, King David would become the king. So the question is asked, a very obvious question. One of the 613 mitzvahs in the Torah is Soim Tasim Alecha Melech. Appoint for yourself a king. So why was Samuel upset when they asked him to appoint a king? They wanted to fulfill a mitzvah. So the Tzemach Tzedek answers and explains, brilliant explanation in understanding what a true leader is. Talk about empathy, but there's a root of it all, which is a word I didn't use before, which is humility. You would think that a leader is someone that possesses more strengths than the subjects that he leads, right? Like, if the subjects are wise, the leader is wiser. If the subjects are wealthy, the leader is wealthier. If the subjects are charismatic, he is even more charismatic. And you see in history, the people who were leaders often were the ones that acquired more, that possessed more. Even presidents of the United States, you don't have to be a cynic to tell you that often the president of the United States is the person who raised most money for his political party. Which of course shows you that he's able to raise money, he's able to inspire people, he's able to, remember it's not just raising money, it's charisma, drive, ambition, success. But a president of the United States is often the president is the biggest fundraiser of the United States. And that's how he climbs the ladder. That doesn't mean necessarily he's the most competent person, but he's successful in that area. So you could think that to be a president, you have to have ego, ambition, wealth, you need money, a lot of money, and other drives that are all about being much more than others. That's what makes you stand out among the others. So here's what the Tzemach Tzedek says about the story with Samuel and the people. When the people came to Samuel and they asked for a leader, he sensed and recognized that they don't want a leader what the Torah says you need a leader for. They want a leader for nationalistic pride reasons. A leader that's like pomp and circumstance to so-called represent. Look, other countries have a king. We also have a beautiful king. Those countries have empires and monuments and horses and palaces. We too want a king that has such wealth. And he explains, why does the Torah say we need leaders in the first place? Why do we need a leader? We all know, especially in Jewish thought, we don't have intermediaries. We connect directly to God. I remember I was on a plane, I think I shared this story, and I was one of these, it was a week that I was like traveling, when my book first came out, they sent me on a tour. So it was a week I was traveling all across the United States, through different time zones, sleeping everywhere, every night somewhere else. My head was spinning. I remember I was very disoriented. So when you're on a plane in those type of moods, you either talk to everybody or you talk to nobody. So I was in the talk to everybody mode. And so I was sitting there, ended up being a Methodist minister, who gave me his whole rundown on the whole different denominations of Christianity. Anyway, middle of nowhere, I just asked him, what do you think about the Pope? So he said to me, the Pope? You know, we're Protestants. The Pope is Catholic Pope. We don't believe in the sacraments, and also in the whole idea that the Pope is a reincarnation of Jesus. And then he said this word that got my attention very quickly. He said, you know, we don't believe in intermediaries. We pray to Jesus directly. So I looked at him, I said, you know, I went to yeshiva with him. He said, yeah, we all went to yeshiva together. You know, why did you choose him among everyone? That was what he said. We don't believe in intermediaries. We pray to Jesus directly. Jews don't have intermediaries. So why do we have the concept, why is there a mitzvah to appoint a king? And for that matter, why is there a Moses? And this is not my question. Korach asked this question. Kol hakol kulam b'doshim. The whole nation, they're all holy. Lama tisnasu. Why did you lift yourself? You and Aaron made yourself leaders. It's a very legitimate philosophical question. If we have access all to God, each on our own level, why do we need a leader? A leader can ultimately create the concept of a crutch. There's the potential for cult leadership, personality cults. There's the potential for abuse, trusting a human being. We have God. And Moses was so disturbed by the question, he had to actually ask God himself. The ultimate answer, this is what the Tzemach Tzedek says, if a leader was more of ego and more power, yes, then he would be an intermediary that disturbs the relationship between you and God. The leader in Jewish life is the most humble of all the people. So transparent that there is as if there is nothing between you and God. If that person gets in the way with their own personality and their interests, that's not a leader. And that's what that's what the prophet Samuel was disturbed by. The Jews didn't want a leader due to humility and someone that's a symbol of what it means to be a godly person on this earth. They wanted a leader for pride purposes. And that's what he was against. But God said to them, listen, if they want that, let them start with that, and we'll get somewhere from there. When you talk about Moses, the Torah describes him as the humblest. The Torah also describes him in this chapter as the shepherd. Why a shepherd? Why would you describe him as a shepherd? And later we always call the leader the Roya Yisrael, the shepherd of Israel. Roya Neman, the faithful shepherd. The Medrash says that when Moses, that God tests his leaders with sheep. Moses, and later King David, the same story, was a shepherd by his future father-in-law, Yisrael. And once the sheep were grazing and the flocks were grazing, and one sheep disappeared from the flock. So Moses was so sensitive, he recognized there was a sheep missing. He went looking and found the sheep had wandered away to a brook of water to get a drink. He carried the sheep back on his shoulders to the flock. And the Medrash concludes when God said, if he is so sensitive to one sheep among thousands, who would even notice? Who was watching? I can trust him with my people. The sensitivity, the empathy. And the same is said about King David, who was also the David Hayaraya. So this is all completely not about more wealth, more power, more charisma. As a matter of fact, as I think I mentioned, Moses did not speak well. He had a speech defect. So I'm sure when he spoke, it wasn't exactly eloquent oratory sounds coming out. But his bittul, his humility, and his empathy, that's what came out. And that's more powerful than all the ornaments and the glamour. As I mentioned here, I think last week, Elu dvarim asher dibra Moshe, we know till today, every word that this man of no words spoke. Moses says in this chapter, Lo ish dvarim anich, I'm a person of no words. And then we have a whole book in the Torah called Elu dvarim asher dibra Moshe. These are the words that Moses spoke, and these are words that we still this day pore over, analyze, argue about, because it's not his own words. As God says in this chapter, Misam Pela Adam, who gives a man a mouth to speak? Are you speaking your words, or are you speaking someone else's words? As I've said many times here, and I say it again now, I sit here and I speak. The truth is, the only right and the only reason I feel I can speak is not because I'm speaking, because I believe I'm listening. You know, for many years I did a lot of listening and absorbing. And if you are sharing your own brilliance, so it's only as brilliant, and everybody has their own brilliance. But if you're able to step aside and share a wisdom that's beyond yourself, then you have a right to speak, and people will listen to you. They say words from the heart enter the heart. Words that come out of the mind enter one ear and go out the other. So here's a story that always touches me. There was the Mittler Rebbe, he was the second Chabad Rebbe, and he was once taking what they call yechidus, private audience. It was after the high holidays, so there was a line of people coming to see him. And this is, you'll see, a leader. And everyone who came in, they went out, they got their blessing, they got their advice. Suddenly, in the middle of nowhere, he tells his secretary, his assistant, I need to take a break. Take a break. So he thought maybe the Rebbe's tired. It was unlike him, uncharacteristic, but yeah, he wants to take a break, we'll take a break. Half hour passes, an hour passes, and people are there waiting. And the assistant doesn't know what to tell the people. There were a lot of people waiting. Many of them were waiting to travel back home after the holidays. And he suddenly hears from the other side of the door, he hears the Rebbe's crying, and clearly going through some real serious anguish. Anyway, hours passed, maybe a day passed. Finally the door opened and the Rebbe says to him he's ready to resume. Now after it all ended and everyone went on their way, the assistant asked the Rebbe, what happened? Why did the Rebbe knew so many people waiting for him, why did he keep everybody waiting and to stop the appointments? So the Rebbe told him the following. He said, when someone comes to me and asks for advice, what I do is, I have to look inside my own soul to find the same similar problem within myself. I have to find something that parallels what I just heard. And when I can find a way to repair it within myself, I then advise the person. There was someone that came to me who shared with me something so terrible, so horrendous. I couldn't find, as much as I tried, I couldn't find it within my soul, anything in my life. Even in subtle form, dakus, something similar. So I could not advise him, so I had to stop. And I had to pray and introspect and dig deep inside myself with introspection and profound soul searching to find something similar, because God would not send me someone with a problem if I didn't have something similar. And then when I was able to find it, I then was able to advise. In one word, a true rabbi, Moshe is a true rabbi, is a soul doctor. You have medical doctors and you have soul doctors. A true leader is a soul doctor. A person who's sensitive to the soul of life. And that's why he doesn't take himself so seriously. Because it's not about power, it's not about exhibiting some type of strength. It's about the subtle area of souls. You'll see true leaders are always beloved by children. Bureaucrats are not. They don't identify with them. A true leader is a soul person who connects to the heart and empathizes with the human condition and has the ability to do so because he or she has been able to transcend their own ego and get themselves out of the way. That's a very rare thing to find. Extremely rare. Moses was the epitome of it. You see it throughout. As I said, a man of no words. God says to him, I don't want to hear your words. I want you to say my words. Who gives a man a mouth to speak? In Kabbalistic texts, they say that Moses was a man that came from Olam HaMachshava. He came from the world of thought. Or the world of water. That's why the strange name Moses, Moshe. That's not the name he was given by his parents. At his bris, at his circumcision, they did not give him Moshe. Moshe is a name given by Pharaoh's daughter because she pulled him out of the water. So she called him, Minamayim Mishisihu, I draw you out of water. So the question is, that's the name that we call Moses, not the name that Amram and Yocheved gave him, a holy name. And that goes down in history. Most people don't even know what his natural name, what his parents' given name was. There are different opinions.
Oh, different.
Does anyone know?
No.
All right.
It says the Medrash 10 names, but there's different names. I could send you a whole document I wrote on all the names if you like. Because, as the Kabbalists say, Moshe captures the essence of Moses, and that's what Pharaoh's daughter. Why was he in the water in the first place? It's true, it was to save his life. But because water is symbolic of what the Kabbalists call Alma Diskasya, the hidden worlds. Elam HaMachshava, the hidden world. Your thoughts are hidden. Your words are revealed. That's why your words can only express a small percentage of your intense feelings and thoughts. Moses came from that intensity, the world of water, the world of the unconscious. Words is the world of the conscious. And that's why Moses found it difficult to speak. When you come from such intensity, it's very hard to communicate. To give a small example, the most intimate things in your heart and soul are the hardest things for you to communicate to others. To speak about, for instance, the weather, sports, all the gossip in the world, you can find people spend hours and hours. Then ask somebody, okay, so tell me something about yourself, and you find very few words. Especially what about something really about your intimate self? So you'd wonder why. If it's so close to you, it's so intimate and so important, you should have many more words than all these superficial things. So initially, many people would answer the answer is because you don't trust. You don't talk about superficial things. Who cares? Elevator talk. You know, guaranteed you go into an elevator. Cold day today, you know. I guess it's better than silent treatment. Maybe not. Who knows? It's just another form of silence. Whereas it comes to intimate things, we don't trust who. But it's not the case. Even with people you trust, it's very hard to express your innermost feelings. Why? Because words, to use Kabbalistic metaphor, are containers. So take a container. A container has parameters. So once the parameters are filled, you can't express it. So words are good containers for so-called superficial expression. Then there's a level that we call metaphor. Poetry, music, romance, art. It's another language. Here the language are broader containers, so you can contain a lot more feeling and passion there. In a way, the more cryptic it is, the more it can contain, because it's not limited to small parameters. Then there's a voice that even metaphor doesn't capture. And someone from the depths of their soul and heart cry out, oy vey, you know, or a laugh. In that one small expression, you can have more volumes than all the words that a person will ever speak. And then there's a voice that's so intimate that has no sound at all. You see people, God forbid, in shock, some real trauma. They can't even cry. Because it's so intense, not any expression, like the Zohar says, Kolo deloy shtama. It's a voice that has no sound. Kol demoma daka. So when Eliyahu Navi is talking about welcoming God's presence, so it says that first came a wind, leberuach, a wind, and he saw that was not God. First he thought the wind, the great winds. Then a thunder, then lightning. So leberuach, lebe'esh, rash. And what captured God? Koil d'mama daka. A very subtle, gentle, delicate voice. So yes, God surrounds himself maybe with fireworks. But within it all is an inner child that is innocent, simple, and doesn't have any of all the acronyms that are so distracting. The Baal Shem Tov has a beautiful analogy for it. He says, Tefillah la'ani. A person should pray like a pauper. And he asks, why like a pauper? When you stand before God, you should pray like a wealthy person. And he answers with an analogy. Two people were invited to see a king. The once in a lifetime opportunity. One was a wise, literate, educated person. The other was an illiterate pauper. Simple. So first comes the literate, educated one, comes into the king's palace. He never saw a palace like this. Completely enamored by the beauty, by the literature, by the music, by the collections, by everything that the king had in his beautiful palace. He gets so consumed with what he sees and appreciates, he misses the appointment with the king. So they realize, oh, too late. Comes the pauper, the illiterate one, can't read, doesn't know what music is, never saw beauty, doesn't appreciate it, he's not a connoisseur, aficionado of all this. So he walks right through all these chambers and goes straight to the king and spends time there and asks the king for everything he needs, including the wisdom to one day appreciate all this beauty and elegance. So Baal Shem Tov says like this: when you stand before the essence of the divine, suspend your literacy and your wisdom and your brilliance. Stand like a pauper, humble, empty, not advocating illiteracy, God forbid. The Torah is full of it. but knowing that you can transcend it, and there are times where you should be as simple as it gets. And he uses an expression, it's a very powerful expression. He says, the etzem of a ish pashut, the pshittus, the simplicity of a simple person touches the simplicity of the divine essence. So in Kabbalistic and Hasidic terminology, you may be familiar with a concept called, or maybe not, there's a thing called etzem and there's a thing called giluyim. When you talk about the essence of a human being, you call it etzem. An essence is never expressed in anything glamorous or dramatic. And then there's giluyim. Giluyim is the whole fanfare, the whole around, the noise, the beauty, the glamour. So when we say in the Torah, it says we say it every Friday night before Kiddush, Eishes Chayil, the woman of valor. So at the end, there's an expression, Sheker Achein Behevel Hayefi, that false is grace, Chein, and emptiness is beauty. Beauty is empty. Ki'im Isha Yiras Hashem Hitisal. The true one you should praise is a woman that is in awe of God. Not fear, awe of God. So everyone asks the question, a very simple question. We understand that beauty and grace can be vain, but the Torah is full of references to things beautifully. You have the concept Zeh Keli V'Amvehu, which we say in Oz Yasher. And we learn from that you should beautify mitzvahs. Have a beautiful mezuzah, a beautiful Torah scroll, a beautiful synagogue. The temple was not built with beautiful aesthetics. As a matter of fact, with the best of all the materials that could be found. If beauty and external and beauty and glamour is so insignificant, the Torah shouldn't, in other places, exalt it. And above all, you go read in the Torah, it says, what do you speak about Rachel? Or Rivka? Eishus Yifas Tayar, Yifas Mara. The same Torah that says, Hevel HaYefi, what a Hevel HaYefi, so why is the Torah giving a compliment to Rachel or to Rivka that they were so beautiful? And then in Mishlei, in Proverbs, it says suddenly beauty is meaningless? Which one is it? It seems like a contradiction. The answer is also obvious. The Torah is not saying, Sheker Achein Behevel, there's a second half of the sentence. If you allow the externals of this universe to be the only thing that you define as beauty, then it's empty. It would be like saying an empty shell that looks so nice, but there's nothing inside. Once there's an inside, and there's a profound essence, then the Giluyim, the outer, reflect that, then absolutely they are of the highest level. That's why you have the concept Chein, Sheker Achein. You're talking about Noach, Motza Chein B'nei Hashem. Noach's name. Other people who found grace, Chein, there's a charm, a certain, the word for Chein. This is the word I want. Grace, charm. So an aura. So you can't say that it's false on its own. So the beautiful concept goes like this, that in this world the goal is to reveal the essence of your soul, but it should express itself in beautiful ways that can be obvious to everyone around us. As it stands, this world is a world of dichotomy. Inner beauty and outer beauty can very easily be two different worlds. We see how we worship outer beauty and ignore or not give as much value to inner. But you have to understand, in Jewish thought, there is no dichotomy. It's seamless. You know, for the Hebrew word panim, what does panim mean? A face. Panim is also in Hebrew means the inside. Usually when we say it's the face of an object, is the surface of an object. In Hebrew, the word panim, the face, the outer, is the same word for the word inner. Going back to the inner child, to a young child, look at a child. Outer and inner are one. There's no such thing as two worlds. That you smile to someone and then you stab them in the back. Echad b'peh, echad b'lev. To be duplicitous. is non-existent in a seamless world. We've become accustomed to it. Moses was a man that bridged these two worlds. He came from the world of water and was sent to the world of earth, of land. A water soul was sent to a land environment. Leadership always comes from the world of water, not from the world of land. That's why it can nourish, nurture, and elevate the earth. So, Korach's question, the answer to it is yes, we don't need leaders because they're more special. We need leaders because we're so distracted by our own externals and the superficials. We need someone to remind us, like a wake-up call, that you have a soul inside of you. So then the question is this. So why is it that we have so few soul doctors today? We have many rabbis. How many people are soul doctors? And what are we supposed to do about it? If you're going to use Samuel, the story with Samuel, what is a true leader? So let's apply it to our rabbi. And people have asked me this question many times, and I've developed a little test. You know, I have people that have asked me this question. They came to a rabbi, they feel that they want to listen, they want to respect, but the rabbi is sometimes doing things or acting or saying things that sound very inappropriate, arrogant, etc. So I made this suggestion. I said, look, if you're in a class or you meet a rabbi that you feel you respect or want to respect, ask him this question. And you hear him say something in a class or in a talk, ask him what are the sources of these ideas. And you'll have two types of answers. One will be, some rabbis will say, or they will imply with their body language, who are you to ask me? Who are you, the Amoritz, ignorant person, to ask me, the big rabbi, my sources? Then there's the other extreme. Someone will say, you know what, I don't have sources. I thought of this in the shower this morning, or just an idea I picked up, etc. And there's a third answer that is rarer to hear, but this is the true answer, because the Torah itself, actually, in a built-in immunity system, says, this is what a rabbi should answer. He will show you humbly his sources, allow you to trace them, allow you to share them with someone else. And we'll say, this is a source, and here's how I interpreted it. In other words, full transparency. That requires humility. It requires confidence. Unfortunately, sometimes power, even in the world of rabbinics, can corrupt and can create a certain I am better than you are, condescension is the word, which is a major turnoff. And I personally have met hundreds, if not thousands of people who will not walk into a synagogue again because they sense that and they can see it. Some will tolerate it because they get what they want, and some won't. And I know it's easy to say, look, we blame it all on the assimilated generation. They don't respect rabbis, they don't respect authority. But in business they say, even though business is suffering today, but they still say the customer's always right. In Israel, it's actually the opposite. They say customer's always wrong. But in America, the customer's always right. So if you have thousands of young people not wanting to go to a synagogue, maybe it's time to start looking at ourselves, I say to fellow rabbis. What are we doing wrong that they're not coming? Just to blame them that they had a bad education and that they don't understand and then blah, blah. Maybe it's not being taught the right way. Ask an average Jew in America and ask him, what do you think a rabbi is? You tell me the answer. I want to know how many people will call it, say, a soul doctor, and a person who's the most empathetic and spiritual and sensitive and humble of the lot. Many will say the most knowledgeable. So it's true, in Torah law, to know a rabbi, just like with a doctor, there are criteria. Here are the criteria. And the four things. And the fourth one is rarely mentioned. The first is you need someone who has knowledge, who studied. 2, ordination. They have to be ordained. Smicha. Ish mepi ish. Samach ish. Samach yodei al, which means actual ordination. The equivalent of, let's say, a doctor getting a degree. Ordained by other doctors and saying this is the right doctor. But then comes third thing, which is shimush. The equivalent of residency or apprenticeship. It's not enough just to have the knowledge and have the document that ordains you. You need to have experience. That's why you'll see a rabbi will work under another rabbi, apprentice. And interestingly, you'll find rabbis, just like it is with doctors, that are specialists in certain areas. There are rabbis will tell you, I'm an expert in the area of marriage and divorce. Some are experts in monetary matters. Some are experts in matters of damages. You can be knowledgeable in all of them, but you specialize in one. And usually Shemos means residency is in the area that you have experience in, which is of course vital. So you think, okay, these are the three criteria. What's missing? Well, here's the fourth one that's rarely mentioned. You know what it's called? Yiras Shamayim. The awe of heaven. You could have the first three and not even believe in God. I met a rabbi who told me he does not believe in God, and he's very knowledgeable, has ordination. I don't know how he was ordained, but the rabbi, I guess, before him maybe didn't notice or himself had some issues with this, and has also experience. He says, you know, honestly, I don't believe in God. He came to me to help him find God. I told him, if you want to find God, the first thing is you got to quit your job. As a rabbi, that is. And you start finding God. He actually is no longer a rabbi today. I don't know if it's due to my influence or they fired him, but it doesn't matter. No names. You know anyone like this?
It's a hedge fund company.
Did you find God?
So this fourth item is harder to measure. How do you measure someone's Yiras Shamayim? Well, look at Moses. It means utter humility, utter empathy, the ability to not be you when you're talking to someone. Meaning that when you go to a person like that, you do not hear that person, you hear yourself. They are invisible. That's what it comes down to. That's a true soul doctor. They respect, not just respect, they are so humble in front of the soul, the dignity of a soul's journey in this world, that it's not about their wisdom and their brilliance. That doesn't mean that they don't have intelligence. Moses was obviously quite a brilliant man. Was a great scholar. But the Torah calls him the humblest that walked on the earth. Empathy, the shepherd. The one that looked around and saw there was no one around, so he did something. So the question, that final question, this is what I was leading to. So what do we do today? And I thought about this, I struggled with this. I grew up in a religious environment, so to speak. So I saw the inside of things. I know it from both ends. And I always wondered, and I myself was quite a skeptic, I still am, but I was even worse when I was younger. And I was from the category that never really got disappointed in any role models because I never trusted them in the first place. So I was in yeshiva in school. I never had like someone that I got attached to. Some of my friends did, and they got disappointed. So I was always skeptical in the first place. And I always wondered, so what happened here? How come God would do something like that, that he'd keep the Moses and the shepherds for those generations, and what did he leave us with? And don't get me wrong, I had good teachers, I have people that I respect and admire, but I don't know if I'd call them soul doctors. I know people who are versed and know the Talmud back and forth, but they don't know anything about a soul. This doesn't mean they're bad people. It could be they never were taught. It could be they're ignorant. It could just be that they have book smart and they have no common sense. You know, they're called the fifth Shulchan Aruch. Anybody have heard of the fifth Shulchan Aruch? Do you know about the fourth Shulchan Aruch? Shulchan Aruch is the code of Jewish law. It consists of 4 sections. Eire Chaim, Choshen Mishpat, Yeredeya, and Even Hazeh. It's the way they categorize it, it's the way it's codified into 4 areas of life, covering different areas. But there's an expression called the fifth Shulchan Aruch. So what's the fifth Shulchan Aruch? It's called common sense. You could be well versed and have no common sense. The wisdom of Torah is not just to know how to interpret a Rashi, a Rambam, understand the nuances of a halachic statement, a legal statement. It's knowing how to apply it to life. And people don't even realize. They think, okay, you know what? This is halacha, this is what you're supposed to do. Black and white. And just now the question is, are you going to do it or you're not going to do it? This is usually how Judaism is taught in many of the schools. But here's an interesting scenario. I think I shared this with you. I mentioned this last week, maybe. A stand-up comic who's in this class came to me years ago, and he started going to Shabbos table. And he asked me, he has a dilemma. All his bookings are on Thursday night, Friday night, and Saturday night. That's when the gigs for a stand-up comic in the clubs. He wants to keep Shabbos. What should he do? This is his income. This is years ago, maybe 15 years ago. And I thought about it, and I said to him, look, there are usually, no one gets a black and white answer from me, so he didn't either. So I said to him, there are some rabbis that will tell you, God said to keep Shabbos. God is the one that's the source of parnasa, of livelihood. You do what God wants, He'll definitely bless you. I cannot tell you that that's not correct, but that's not what I'm going to tell you. Some rabbis will say, listen, you didn't grow up with Shabbos. We can find a loophole. There's some opinions. You can use a mic, not use a mic. You walk to the club, and we'll tailor Shabbos fitting to your place. There are those that will say that. It's a rabbinic edict. It's not from the written Torah edict, etc. And then there's the third answer, which is what I will tell you. I always have the third answer. The third path is, I will teach you the consequences of keeping Shabbos and not keeping it. But you're an adult, and you're going to have to make this decision yourself. This is the last thing he wanted to hear from me. He wanted me to make the decision for him. I said, you're an adult. You know, I find it beautiful that you're so inspired by Shabbos. But you have to own your choice. You're an adult. You may be inspired today, and next week I don't know where you're going to be. You may be keeping Shabbos, but 50 other things you're not doing, which I'm not judging you for. This is a process. You didn't grow up with it. If I tell you that God promises you that you'll have a livelihood, even if you don't work on Friday nights because you're keeping Shabbos, it's God's promise. But you know something? You have to believe it, not I have to believe it. Because one day it may come 3-4 months down the road, and it won't work out exactly as you did. You thought you made a deal with God. Look, I'm keeping your Shabbos. How come you're not giving me equal income? And you get upset, and then it'll backfire. So you have to make this choice. Now, he didn't like my answer at all. But it is an unbelievable, I think, lesson that you'll see what happened. Exactly that what happened. He kept Shabbos, and 3-4 months down the road, he got angry because his income was waning, and he got angry. He said, I'm keeping Shabbos. And for 2-3 years, he not only got angry about Shabbos, he got angry at everything, at all the rabbis, including me, even though I told him this, but so be it. And now, today, he's a Shomer Shabbos Jew and has found a way. He matured and learned how to own Shabbos, and then he owned it. Now, you could say, why didn't I just give him the black and white answer? Because the black and white answer is in the Torah. It still has to apply to your life. A person that grew up 10, 15, 20, 30 years with habits that are they're not accustomed to certain Torah concepts, they have to learn to embrace them at their pace. And each of us has our own pace. Do not be afraid. I find too many people are pressured due to peer pressure and others, and then it always backfires. Or they remain infantile. I know couples that got married, Bali Tshuva as they call them, and every stupid little detail they have to go run to their rabbi or rebbitzin to ask because they were never empowered. The whole Torah is about empowering people to stand on your own feet. Yes, it's always good to have a mentor, a teacher to run to. But basic skills of life, if the Torah doesn't teach it, then it teaches you to be an infantile person, that's like a cult. Now, I know some people may not like what I'm saying, I don't know in this room, but this is the Judaism I understand. Now you may say, what's my source? Right? So you could ask everybody their sources but me. I'm just kidding. I have to deliver the sources too, and there are plenty of sources for this. I'll be happy to share them with you afterwards if you like. So I want to conclude and say the following. And this, I think, is the punchline in a way. So what do we do? Here's a situation where we live in a world. You know what? I want to share a story with you. That's, I think, a good way to... I know we're going a little longer than usual, but I think it's worthwhile, this story. Some of you may have heard it from me, but it was a life-defining moment in my life. I was on a panel discussion with 2 other rabbis. One called himself Orthodox, the other called himself conservative. I call myself none of the two. Simple Jew that's trying. You'll see from the story why. And the panel was about, we spoke in, it was in Huntington, New York, in Long Island. Touro Law School, Touro College has a law school there. And questions were asked by a moderator to all of us. It was about principles of Jewish faith, Messiah, redemption, so on. And it was very cordial. It was a very nice panel. Fine. At the end of the evening, some questions were allowed from the audience. A woman got up in the back of the room. There's an auditorium, maybe 400 or 500 people. Listen to the story. It's a life-changing story, as you'll see. And she gets up in this eloquent voice and says the following. All three of you beautifully express the belief that Jews have that at the end of days there'll be a messianic age, a world of peace and harmony and coexistence and love and so on. My question is the following. If the Messiah, Mashiach, comes tonight, what will happen, she says, to the majority of Jews that I speak on behalf of, that call themselves the unaffiliated, the secular? You know, the Jews that are struggling, what does it mean to be Jewish? Am I committed? Do I go to a synagogue in Yom Kippur, etc., etc.? Some of us don't know whether to believe in God, some do, some don't, agnostic, whatever. That was her question. And right away, I said to myself, oh, okay, this is, I've heard a lot of questions. I said, this is going to be interesting. Thank God I was the third one in order to respond. The first one was the Orthodox rabbi, and he said the following 4 words. He said, God will have mercy. Did you ever hear 500 people boo somebody in a room? It's not pleasant. The place booed him. There was like a loud, resounding boo. First of all, they did not appreciate his answer, which was no answer, and also condescending, God will have mercy. Then came the conservative rabbi, and he turned to me. We were on a stage with these lights on the podium. And he said, yeah, Rabbi Jacobson, I have the same question myself. What will happen to them? But then he added some real fuel to the fire. He said like this. And his voice was dripping with cynicism. He said, I once heard in the name of one of the tzaddikim, quote unquote, of the last generation, that said that the Holocaust happened because Jews were not observant, because the Reform movement was born in Germany. And then he went into graphic detail, which I will not repeat, how every atrocity perpetrated by the Nazis on the Jews was tit for tat, midah keneged midah, for another crime that the Jews did not, another sin that the Jews transgressed. The women, the children, it was horrendous. The place was like, I remember everyone was like stunned. We were all like, this guy. So then he says, so is this going to happen to the majority of the Jews today in this generation that are not Shomer Shabbos, that are not kosher, that are not observant when Mashiach comes? Mashiach comes tonight, basically. So that's the stage is set. If you like, we could end the class right now. And you tell me what you would answer. I had no clue what I was going to say, to be very honest. Now it was my turn. Now I was nowhere to run, and I was getting hot under the collar. And I've been around. I've been asked many questions. I had to improvise, and I saw really this was a moment of truth for myself and for everybody. Real moment of truth, because I took very seriously one most important thing. There were 500 people in the room.
You want to get out of here.
Speak for yourself. She said, the only thought I had was, do I want to get out alive? The thought in my mind was, here 500 people in the room, and they just heard 2 so-called rabbis who don't have an answer to such an important question, and what are they going to be left with if I repeat what they said, or say some other brilliant... And I felt very, this all was running through my mind all the time. So it came my turn. I closed my eyes, I prayed to God, and said that God should put the right words in my mouth. And I thought to myself, what would the Baal Shem Tov say? What would Moshe say? Moshe Rabbeinu prayed for the Jews who built the golden calf. What would the real lovers of the Jewish people say to such a question? And that's what I thought, and this is what I said. And I opened up, making sure to cite the sources of all my teachers. And I said that Reb Shneur Zalman of Liadi once said that when you ask a question and you don't have an answer, you tell a story. And if that doesn't work, you sing a song. So I said, I'm going to tell a story, and if it doesn't help, I may have to sing. Okay, so everybody laughed. It was very nice, but I knew that wasn't going to be enough. I wasn't able to say, okay, good night. I'll sing a song and good night. And I told the following story, briefly, that there was one of the Rebbes, he had a friend that was a very simple, non-observant Jew, not educated in Judaism, but he spent time with him. One of his Chassidim once said to the Rebbe, Rebbe, I don't understand you. Here's a person, it seems disproportionate, not fair. You have so many students who pray, who study, who are trying. Why don't you give them a little more time? And instead you spend so much time with this individual. Not that I have anything against him. But you always encourage us to ask questions, so I'm asking you. So the Rebbe knew that this man was a great chassid, but also he was a businessman. He was a diamond merchant. So he asked him to bring several diamonds of different values, different stones. He laid them out on the table. The Rebbe asked that. And the Rebbe says, I'm going to choose the one that's most precious. And he chose the largest stone. And he asked this merchant, the chassid, he said, so is this the most precious one? He said, no, it's not. But it looks so lustrous, it's larger than all the rest. It looks to be, to my naked eye, more beautiful than other stones. So the businessman says to the Rebbe, listen, with all due respect, Rebbe, you have to have a trained eye. It's not the naked eye. The stone is more complicated. There's 4 C's, I don't know if he said that. The cut, the carat, the color, clarity, the charisma. So the Rebbe looked at him and smiled in return and said, look, if that's the case with stones, simple stones, how much more so with souls? What are you talking to me about souls, about people? You have to have a trained eye. You can't just see with the naked eye. You decide who's simple, who's not simple. You decide who's powerful, who's not powerful. Some people can be scholars. That was a gift that was given to them. Some people paid much heavier prices. They may not be scholars, but the prices they paid are much stronger and much greater. So I told the story, and I said to the audience, I said, the mystery of souls' journeys we do not know. The mysterious ways of why, for instance, some souls come to a home and a family, a loving home with healthy parents who send the children to good schools, give them a healthy Jewish education, sense of morality, confidence, nurturing, everything they need to take on the challenges of life. And then another soul enters into a home that's broken, dysfunctional, divorce, abandonment, abuse, you name it. Who decided this soul should go here and this one here? It's God. The mysterious ways of God. We don't know why and understand it. Who are we to know what challenges people have and what the meaning behind it is, and whose soul is greater? The one that went into the home that was a healthy home, maybe that's the weaker soul. Maybe the stronger souls were put in the harshest environments. And then I finally said, and one more thing I want to add, that same Reb Shneur Zalman said that when Moses was shown at the end of his life, all the generations to come, being the great leader Moses, God said, I will show you as the shepherd of Israel, I will show you all the souls. So it says that Moses, when it says Moses was the humblest man that walked on earth, he was humble for those souls that would appear in the last generations of time. Why? Because in his time, they were called a Der Deya, an enlightened age. They grew up. They saw miracles. They witnessed the exodus from Egypt. They witnessed Kriyas Yamsuf, parting of the sea. Mount Sinai, the building of a temple. They were protected for 40 years, and still they were far from perfect. But then he sees souls at the end of time who don't even know what Yom Kippur is or Shoshana. They question, I said to the woman, the number that you just said, the unaffiliated that you call. And these souls are still struggling, and they're here, they're trying to wonder, they ask. They try to go to Shul Yom Kippur, they're trying their best. That humbled him. He saw what? That he could not believe. Where does that come from? That's the unbelievable power. A generation without spiritual leaders, as it was in the times of Moses. So I concluded and I said, and I spoke this, I probably even elaborated more, I was shorter here, but I took full advantage. I said, so I will tell you what I was taught. If Mashiach comes tonight, the souls with the greatest challenges will march first and lead the rest of us. And by tomorrow morning, they and all of us will understand that the healthiest and most powerful way to actualize as a human being and as a Jew is through Torah and mitzvahs. That's what I was taught. And this part of the story I have to share with you as well. I'm not saying it to toot my horn, but it was part of what happened. The place was like you could saw such an emotional reaction. And I was proud, I have to say. Not because I won here or anything, because I felt that I had answered an answer which was not my own. It was what I was taught about souls. And it also showed that these two rabbis had no clue. In fact, they didn't answer this answer. It tells you much. Try it out. Ask people you respect. Ask them the question. What will happen when Mashiach comes tonight? What will happen to the 90% of the Jewish people that are, we call, unaffiliated, non-observant? Interesting to hear the answers. Because we don't have people who understand or respect the soul. Because it wasn't taught to us in schools, even in religious schools. And that's why we're lacking this type of leaders. So what do we do? And this is my final statement. What we do is, each of us must become a leader. I don't understand the mysterious ways of God either, but I will say that we have to say that the grassroots, people like yourself, like ourselves, have to in some way create an energy. In Hasidic and Kabbalistic terminology, it says sometimes the light comes yashar, it comes from above down, and sometimes it's chezer, it comes from below. The sage who said, I learned much from my teachers, even more from my colleagues, but most of all from my students. Students can teach a power that only comes from below. I really sincerely believe that, especially with the network ability today, if used for spiritual purposes, not just for frivolous and meaningless things, can literally transform the world, because souls can come together and create an energy from below that will erupt into a true spiritual awakening that may never come from the establishment or the bureaucracies from above, with all due respect. Does that mean that you can answer all your own questions? Obviously, we need, as much as possible, a mentor, a teacher, a friend. But don't underestimate the power you have. So each of us has to be like a small little Moses. And we have a Moses inside each of us. That's what it says in the books. And that you have to look around and see if there's no one else around. Yeah, you may be very small. Moses looked around. There was no one. He didn't see himself as the big savior. But he saw there's no one else doing anything. So you have to do something. Each of you here have your own sphere of influence, which God sent you there. You can accomplish there what other great people cannot accomplish because you have access. In your way. This may mean sharing a thought with someone, opening your home once a month and then having a little class there. It can be creating a Friday night Shabbos meal. I mean, there are hundreds of ways. I can go on and on. It means, above all, taking the initiative. We should not feel like we're victims. We're not just recipients of other people's problems. We can make a difference. That's called leadership. Does that mean you're the President of the United States or a leader like Moses that leads an entire world and you have the vision to lead everyone? It's leadership in your community, in your corner of the earth. Each of us was empowered to be a leader. When your soul leads your body and your spiritual values will lead your material ones, you'll be a leader in your life, lead yourself, and you'll be able to lead others. It's as simple as that. I just read a quote. I never knew that Gandhi had said this, but I liked it, so if I may repeat the name of Gandhi, okay? Not that I agree with all the principles, but so Gandhi said something like this, that be careful of your thoughts, because your thoughts will shape your words. Manage your words, because your words will define your actions. Watch over your actions, because your actions will become your habits. And be careful over your habits, because your habits will become your values. And then your values will become your destiny. I thought it was quite well said. Achshava dibra ma'aseh, thought, speech, and action. Yeah. We are often behaving in ways that we are like a product of something, a product of our parents, of an environment, of community, of the media. We're reacting to people all the time. This happens, you react. Things change in your life when you stop reacting and you start proacting. Do something that's not a reaction to someone else. Start something. As I said, it could be a class, it can be one-on-one. Anything that's initiated by you, that's leadership. Because leadership is a qualitative thing, it's not a quantitative thing. Do it in one area of your life and there's a shift. And you'll see you can change your life. So we learn much from Moses about this. And even though I may sound critical about the people we have around us today, well, it was because I was critical, that's why it sounded critical, but it was not my intention just to be negative. Obviously the whole point here is to be positive. We're not here to just bemoan and come together like a broken hearts society to talk about how bad things are. We're here to take an initiative. So this week, as we begin the chapter of Shemos, the book of Exodus, story of Moses, which will now be the central theme through the entire Torah. The rest of the Torah is all about the story of Moses. Just 40 years. From here on, 40-year period of Moses' leadership. It's all a lesson to us today how to be leaders. And this will impact how you react to the economy today, how you react to the Middle East and to other things. To begin to let your soul speak and let it shine, and you'll see how it impacts you and others. And I just say to you, as I always offer, I offer my friendship, my support to create this revolution together, grassroots revolution, from the bottom up. So everyone have a very good evening. I do want to make an announcement or two, if I may, because some of you are here, so I want to say, we've already, since the Hanukkah party was so successful, we're making a Purim party, which will be March 10th? Is it 10th? Tuesday. March 10th in the afternoon. It'll be here. You'll hear more details. If you want to save the date, it will be a day not to forget. Let's put it that way.
Party not to miss.
Sorry?
Party not to miss.
Party not to miss. And we're planning it, and it should be quite unique as well. I will also say tomorrow night we have here Philip is giving a class at 7. Philip Namaworth, a musician, colleague of mine, and then at 9 is what we call Mendel Jacobson, my own son actually. Does this thing called solar energy, Jew Jam, he calls it, I think. It's the hipster style stuff. So I wanted to announce that. And next Tuesday, my brother will resume his comedy of Kabbalah. I'm sorry, the comedy of Kabbalah, is that what it is? The comedy and Kabbalah of relationships. And it will be about why get into a serious relationship in the first place. Lessons from Adam and Eve, where it all began. So this is some announcements. But if you leave your email, if you haven't left your email or you check out the emails, we'll send out all the calendar and all the different details and information. I just say these announcements, I know it's a little, these announcements are somewhat not exactly compatible to everything that was spoken here, but we have to deal with some practical business as well. And I want to wish everyone a very good night, and I hope to meet you in the leadership circle in the next days and weeks. And let's change the world. Everyone have a great night.
Just at the end of the table.